before you turn the lights off, maybe I should just say a few words, and when it's time to see the slideshow, that's when show the slideshow to your grandchildren. They're ready to turn off the lights immediately. You can't have an introduction of the kind that I'm going to have right now, but I won't try your patience too much, because the first thing that I mentioned is how come people begin involving themselves in research for their relatives and genealogy research at that. It's quite common to find people who have reached retirement age, like myself, involved in it. But you also do find younger people, especially school children in Israel, who are usually required to undertake a project called Shoroshim, a family history or family story, as a class or school project that usually in I think the 11th grade Kita Yud, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe Yud, I don't quite remember. And what happens is that they come and start asking questions, and they start rummaging through the family photos, and they put together an album. Now, the first time this is done with the eldest child, okay, he extracts the information and puts together a credible piece of work. Then his younger brother or sister doesn't go as much in such great effort. He simply copies what his sibling wrote, and he adds on a bit more. And by the time you come to the third one, then you practically nothing at all. It's all there. It's ready. So the idea of having a family story that is in fact studied, or if you like researched, with not word researched here saying inverted commas, but information is collated, is in fact inculcated in Israeli school children at quite an early age, and that differs from what I remember anyway of my childhood, my school years. No one ever spoke about that when I went to school. It wasn't sort of a topic that one thought about very much, as far as I remember. I would say that it exists altogether. Now, why go into genealogy at all? I have a saying here. I think it's a quotation, I didn't make it up. But anyway, it says, yesterday the past is history, tomorrow the future is mystery, today is a gift. That's why we call it the present. We don't know how long we will be around to collect our stories and pass them on to the next generation. But we try and study the past, we try and look into what has happened in the past and try and understand our family stories, to have something to pass on, to have some kind of information or legacy or heritage that you can in fact say later on to your family, to your children, your grandchildren, look, this is how things were, this is how things began. They won't necessarily be interested straight away, but you can create a kind of curiosity around the topic gradually. For instance, in Jewish tradition, when you sit around this table at the Seder, what are you doing basically? You're telling the story of the Jewish family over the centuries. You're telling about how the Jews escaped from Egypt, how the Lord took the Egyptians out with Moses' help, and you are telling a story which is basically has the elements of a family story, because it's passed on from generation to generation and becomes like a mitzvah to say you will tell your children and your grandchildren. In Hebrew it's called Me'igadet al-Bincha. You will pass the story on. So you are almost duty bound, if you like. You've got an obligation to do something with that story, not just, remember it for yourself. And then, as happens very often, people then come along and say, oh, I wish I'd asked about these sort of things when there was full time to ask, and then they regret. So you've got something that you want to write down, your own recollections, and put your own photos, albums in shape and in order. Do it for purpose and think about, okay, sometime and somewhere, someone in the family is going to appreciate what you've done and learn a bit more about the family story. There's another added value of, let's call it, relating family history, and in fact, genealogy is the story of the generation. We can call it from generation to generation, which is in fact the name of a book that is about genealogy. you have what is called, I call it a sort of a window of looking into the soul of a family or community. Because you're not just having like facts that are recorded, for instance, about genealogies in the Bible. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot 12 sons and daughter, and a daughter, and so on. It's more than that. It's, you know, it's not just the line of descent, if you call it. Okay, it's more than that. You are gathering additional information while you're about it, and you are able to paint a picture, if you like, or a picture of what the family life was like at a certain period in time, say 100 years ago, say 50 years ago. And from that you can also add additional information and get a picture of the community, because the family isn't an isolated unit. All the families that you research lived in communities. Some of these communities no longer exist. We know what happened in the Shoah. And in recent years, many researchers, and family researchers at that, have undertaken visits to the countries where the Holocaust occurred in East Europe, trying to retrace what they could, trying to find evidence of the families that they lost there, that lived there, whether it's through documents, through cemetery reports, through gravestones, even through testimonies that are collated in Yad Vashem and elsewhere. Occasionally you can find people who are a living witness to what occurred, and they have recorded their testimonies as well. So the search that we're talking about in family histories deals with families and communities, some of which no longer exist. One has to consider that there may be survivors here and there. Never give up. I heard a lecture and a beautiful story from Trisha about her work, Never Give Up. She said, you always try to find out whether someone indeed did survive, maybe someone you thought didn't. And you have testimonies as well. So where do these testimonies and where does the evidence come from? I was very privileged to have the opportunity to cooperate with a professional genealogist. I'm not a professional genealogist, I'm an amateur, like most of us are, but I did consult a professional and try to get a handle on what records would be available in East Europe today, from the towns, the townships, the shtetl, the places where our ancestors lived. And after consulting and sitting down, and this particular genealogist is an expert on this town where my paternal grandfather came from Zaga, and he pointed out that Zaga and other towns that our ancestors came from, the records that had been available were destroyed, not necessarily during the period of the Nazi conquest of those countries, but surprisingly enough, after the Soviets, who had overrun East Europe after World War II, were forced to withdraw. And they withdrew in 1991 when Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia became independent countries. And as they withdrew, they engaged in a large-scale destruction of records and documents, maybe out of policy, maybe out of spite, maybe no one knows really, but they simply wrecked a lot of archives and documents. So many of the documents that were there were no longer available. Certain documents have been retrieved. They've been entered into the databases of certain websites in Jewish genealogy. And of course you've got this enormous repository of documents at the Yad Vashem and at a place that's now called Bad Arolsen in Germany, which has records of all the people who were decimated during the Holocaust. So what I've got here now concerns my family, my paternal side of the family. We talk about my maternal side, my mother's side in another talk sometime else. But this is the Levitas family story, and I'm going to show you through the PowerPoint display some of the stages and some of the means that I used to gather the information. So I call it sources and resources. Okay, so there were sources that I looked into, and they became resources, if you like. I can then, after I've made this display and discussed it a bit, sort of do something a little bit more schematic about how one goes about locating relatives. If one wants to locate relatives, some people don't want to locate relatives. Okay, but if you intent on finding who is and who you belong to, and what exactly is the unbroken chain that you are a part of, then you might find it helpful in that respect, even though it's telling the story of my particular family. So, I would like to point out another thing. Certain of the documents are accompanied by photos. Now, where did these photographs come from? The photographs came from family albums, that's one of them, and also, in one particular case, a very rare photograph that I'll tell you about later, that Gabriella knows about, came, as it were, as an heirloom. It was handed down. It wasn't a photo album. That somehow this photo, a unique photo of my great-grandfather from 1900, was passed down as a sort of an heirloom that remained in the family. And I learned about it from a second cousin who lives in the Golan, and she was kind enough to send me a copy of the photo. And then I asked Gabriella, who does restoration of old photographs, to restore, touch it up, and make it sort of more easy to ascertain the features of the person in the photo and what exactly he was wearing and what exactly the place was where the photo was taken. So you can have a family album of photos, and you can have heirlooms that are passed on from one generation to another. And then you can also occasionally have photos that come from documents, if the documents have a photo attached, naturally. Well, photography, I believe, was discovered or first invented in, I think, 1856 or 1860, if I'm not mistaken. So you might, taking photographs for our kind of identity cards or passports, that is a later innovation. I can't tell you exactly when. But any photos that you can get hold of, the one important thing is always, if you are making a collection, to write down, if you know who the person is, and if you know the date and where the photo was taken, write it down. Don't rely on your memory, because sooner or later it'll be very difficult to recall, and it'll be very difficult to identify the photo.
Right, can I just ask everyone to turn off their phone? I meant to at the beginning, sorry. You mind? Sorry.
Okay?
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Now, about the Levitas family, I do want to make one comment. The fact of the matter is that the name Levitas is a well-known name. It's got in Beta Futsot, there's an index of names and place names and also family names, and you can actually go there and have a printout of the origins of your family name. And your family name, it will turn out, usually has got quite a long history, and sometimes it's also associated with names that sound similar or written in a similar way, but they're not quite the same, because as you well know, when Jews immigrated from one part of the world to another, from all over, and as they entered new countries, when they were asked by the immigration officials, well, what is your name? Well, they used to say whatever the name was. Sometimes the immigration official just, didn't even understand what he was hearing, and he wrote down some arbitrary other name, but anyway, in many cases he couldn't spell it in any particular accurate way. Whatever the case may be, the name can be spelled in very many different ways. But Levitas actually is a name that you can find as far back as the Mishnah, 2,000 years ago, and exactly in the same way as it's written today in Hebrew and in English translation. And that is very rare. There was a certain Rabbi Levitas, in the Mishnah, that's to say, lived about the 4th century Common Era, AD, or the 3rd maybe, when the Mishnah was being redacted, and he was one of the, call them the sages, or anyway the rabbis, whose words were recorded in the book of the Mishnah called the Ethics of the Fathers, Sayings of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. You find that the rabbis given space, and they are quoted as saying, Hillel said this, and Rabbi Yochanan said that, and so on and so on. And this Rabbi Levitas, who was from Yavna, he also said something. And his sentence was a rather, pessimistic sentence. And okay, he sort of said that, I don't want to just make people kind of feel despondent, but he wasn't a great optimist. He said something like, look, please let's remember to be very kind of humble people, because what is the end of man? The end of man is the worm. In other words, every one of us is not going to survive. And so we've got nothing to be, stick our noses up and be proud about like that. So he was a bit of a pessimist, let's say. But anyway, he's there in the Mishnah. And the fact that his name, exactly as it was spelled then, if you read in the Mishnah, in Pirkei Avot, is still spelled the same way, doesn't mean that I or anyone else can trace a direct line, a genealogical line back to him. It means that the name was quite commonplace, and apparently it was a name that was used and recognized, and he had that name then. Subsequently, you find the name in East Europe, and people have said, or in Beta Futsot anyway, they gave a page explaining the origin of the name. And they said that, okay, one of the other places where the name, it's a derivative of Levi, and Levi was one of the sons of Jacob. But you can find derivatives that are found in a somewhat similar form, and also a derivative in which the TAS after the Levi is supposed to indicate the son of. Let's say in East Europe, this would be like a suffix for an East European language, whether it be Latvian or Lithuanian, and so on. So it could be that those were the latter-day sources where you could trace the name. And we know that the Levitas family had its forebears in that area that borders between Lithuania and Latvia. Now, Zagar is a little town on the border between Latvia and Litva. You must remember that the borders sort of shifted before the war, during the war, after the war, with the Soviets, etc. But there it is on the map, Zagar. And if you go into the websites about Zagar in Google or in Jewish Gen, it's called, Jewish Genealogy, you will find that among the names mentioned in Zagar, there was certainly more than one Levitas. I can't say that they were our relatives. I'm just saying that the name was there. Okay? And I managed to trace back approximately, let's say it's 4 generations, and the 5th is a little bit iffy. The reason is that there's a little bit of a difficulty identifying the 5th generation as the ancestor of the 4th. Somehow the connection is in the records, it's a little bit problematic. I'll tell you about those records a bit later. Most of these are tax records. People pay taxes. And the tax records were recorded by the authorities, and those were the Russian Tsarist government authorities. And those tax records, when you look at them, you see who paid the tax. And usually the name says, who the father was as well. So-and-so, son of so-and-so. So there you can have the line of ancestry, if you can identify it. But suddenly you might come across a case where you've got the name, but you haven't got the ancestry there, you haven't got the father there. So that is the case with our 5th generation.
Just ask you, are you Levis?
Yeah, we're all Levis, according to, in the Bet Knesset, we're all Levis.
And the name Levitan?
Levitan could be a similar variation. It's not connected with Levitas, as far as I know. Let me tell you just a little bit more about, I can, spend a lot of time, and I don't want to spend all the time on this. A lot of people write me some emails, and they say, you Levitas, right, well, do you know this Levitas and that Levitas? And I start corresponding. And the name appears in family trees that are not based on the Levitas name. There's a family called Horowitz. They live, I think, even in Randana, if I'm not mistaken, or Crosshaber. Eric Horowitz, and here somewhere. No, I don't know.
He's also Horowitz.
I'm also Horowitz.
Anyway,
there are many.
The family tree consists of about, I think, 20 different families, one of whom is Levitas as well. And you go through all those names, and you see, I can see that they are not related as far as I know. But I cannot prove that it's not, that somewhere, 4 generations back, there may have been a common ancestor. So it's fascinating because you begin thinking, okay, what evidence have you got? And the problem of evidence and in genealogy is subject of so many genealogy conferences. What is good evidence? Are we just speculating? We're talking about facts that can be validated, can be corroborated, and you think, well, what is exactly a genealogist? Is he an archaeologist? Is he a detective? Is he a legal mind? Is he a forensic expert? How do you corroborate all the evidence if you're going into this and you don't want to tell fairy tales? I mean, there's a difference between a legend. A family legend can be a family story that has got great power and great influence on the family. They believe it, and it shapes their outlook. But it remains a story unless there's more or less firm evidence that what the story is about actually occurred. So the Levitas name is common, and I have correspondence from people in the United States and elsewhere, and they say to me, tell me, do you know that Elsie Levitas wrote that Gidon, her husband, as well as her first cousin, wants to move with the grandson and take him to pray? Well, I go into this and I could get tied up in knots. And I write them back and I say, look, as far as I know, I can show you our family tree, which I'm going to show you later. Somehow I can't find a link at the moment. But who knows? We'll keep trying, we never know. So we don't give up. So, for anyone who's interested, there are 2 alternative Levitas family trees here that are not my family tree, and then there's my family tree as well over there. So I think we could start the slideshow right now, and we'll go ahead and see if I'll explain as we go along what we are looking at here. Okay, how many ancestors does everyone think they've got? Or they can identify? No one knows how many you've got, but how many can you identify? As far as I'm concerned, I was able to identify out of 5 generations, and I'll show, just click a bit further, going down, I'm going to show you the 5 generations. First of all, there's myself, then 2 parents, 4 grandparents, okay? Okay, but this is, remember, this is not just my father's side. 2 parents is parental ancestry on my paternal side, my mother and my father. 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents. The total, if you click, you'll get a total here. So if you can trace back 5 generations and you can find all of them, you're going to find 31 people, including yourself. Okay? If you could do it. And I didn't manage to do it. I could only find about half of them, let's say 15 or 16, going back to 2 great-grandparents. This is my father's side. And 1 great-great-grandparent, who I think I've identified. I told you there's a little bit of difficulty because of the records that were a bit unclear. So let's go ahead and see where the story begins. That is what I'm looking for. I was looking for those 5 generations, and I had to start with someone who, my family and I, we never met him, the people who were here, as to say, because our family consisted of an ancestor, a grandfather who was born in Lithuania and had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. And 2 of the sons went to South Africa, and 2 daughters and the 3rd son came to Eretz Israel. We'll talk about that just now. So we didn't know our grandfather personally, okay? But we have this photo, and he was a Talmid Chacham. He spent most of his adult life, in fact his youth as well, as a Talmud yeshiva student. I didn't say he learned in the yeshiva, but he was a student. And he was born in Zaga. His spouse was Tova Shagam. We'll get to her in a minute. And he was from Zaga, and she was from Kulshan, it's called, in Lithuania. Okay? So before they get to the immigration from there, that's a story in itself. The fact is that he left Zaga, and they got married in Kulshan in Kursanai. I'll show you that on the map just now. So, you know, you want to know more particulars. How do they meet? You never know. And you can't get to the unless you have something down at the time and left a testimony. And in that particular, we don't know. But we do know that our parents, all the children were born in Ilshan in Pilsner. That we know. And when it came to about 1920, 1921, I'll show you that two of the children, one son and one daughter, had immigrated already to pre-1914 Palestine. One, the oldest son, had emigrated first to Palestine and then to South Africa. And the parents and one son, my father, and another daughter, like my aunt, came in 1920. He passed away in 1937. He's buried in Tel Aviv, in Nachalat Yitzchak. So he married Tova Shagin. Tova is our grandmother. Okay? And she is Yona Tova, as you know. And she was born Shagin, and we don't know her date of birth. We don't know his date of birth either. But she passed away in 1933. She is the daughter of Israel Yona. We'll come back to him in a second now. We're talking about her father and Israel Levitas, who we started with, father-in-law. Okay? She is the daughter, Tova, and she had another daughter, a sister as well, who was left in East Europe, and her descendants managed to escape, but we don't know what happened exactly. 3 of the 5 siblings emigrated to South Africa in the late 19th century of Tova's 5 siblings. Who were Tova's 5 siblings? My paternal great uncles. In other words, my grandmother's brothers. Okay, 3 of them emigrated to South Africa and to Cape Town at the turn of the century. Okay, we'll tell you about them a bit later. Because this is the wave of immigration, and there are quite a few South Africans here. I can see that. You know the story. I mean, the conditions were difficult, and young people were able to somehow make their way out, and some came to this country, and some came to South Africa and America and whatever. And the interesting thing about this is that Tova's father, Israel Yonashagam, as a widow, came to Israel in 1900. In 1900, long before anyone else in the family emigrated from Lithuania, as far as we know. I always add those words, as far as we know, because you sometimes come up and find that there's something more that you didn't know. Anyway, he came and he lived in Jerusalem in Mea Sharim. He was an ultra-Orthodox Jew, and he's buried on the Mount of Olives. He died in 1907. And we have a record, and we have a gravesite, an inscription on the grave, and that is evidence that he came, and that is where he was. The date 1900, I believe, was somehow, I believe, mentioned in some correspondence. Let's go on a bit. Now, when my grandfather, Israel, and the family came to Tel Aviv, they were registered in a census that was conducted in Tel Aviv under the British mandate in 1922. And you'll see that they just click a second. Here they are. Okay, Levitas Israel. This is the Hebrew, by the way. There's an English one later on. Levitas Israel. Okay, and Levitas Tova. Okay, and David, Dov, and Hannah. The 3 who stayed with him. Where were they staying in Tel Aviv at the time of the census? They were staying in a neighborhood of Tel Aviv called Neve Tzedek. Neve Tzedek was a very, very kind of interesting neighborhood at the time.
Next to Jaffa.
Well, it's next to, on the way to Jaffa, if you like. It's South Tel Aviv. And they were staying either in rental, some kind of rental agreement, or in a hospital owned by a man by the name of Lipschitz. I never found out who this Lipschitz was, and I'm afraid I haven't been able to trace any more information about it.
It was a hotel.
But these census records are available, and they've been translated into English as well. Click again, see what you... Here it is, the translation in English, okay? And here it's not with these. But at any rate, the description is okay, he's the family head, his wife is the wife, okay, there's a son, and there's a daughter, okay? And they are called hopeless here. Now, why are they called hopeless? Possibly because the census taker, okay, he asked them, look, is this your home? You're on your home. No, they're not. They're living in a hospital or some kind of arrangement. So why they wrote the word homeless in the census, you can no longer discover what the exact category was. But it's possible that the idea was to say, look, you own a home, or you've got a home, or you're living in some kind of temporary kind of place.
Where are these censuses held?
The census is undertaken by Rose Feldman, who is the one of the senior members of the Israel Genealogy Society, and she and a team have actually produced an English version of this entire census.
Is it on the website?
Big one?
Is it on the IGS website?
It's it's on the IGS website, but I don't think the whole census is there. At least the description of the fact that the records are available. I suggest that you go into the website, the IGS website, and see what's written about it. So the census is very important information for anyone who's looking into their family story. If they can think of looking at the census, you've got to think, okay, where can I find information? And if you read the genealogy journals, and they talk about, look, there was a census, and you know that the family came somewhere around 1920. So, okay, I was very fortunate. I asked this lady, Rose Feldman, do you mind looking up and see if you've got this family there? She said, sure. Looked up and sent me the material. So there you are. So
Can I just ask a question?
Beg pardon?
She spelled some of the names differently.
Okay, so there's an E instead of an A there, but it doesn't really make that much difference. We're talking about the same person. Yeah. So there's a son. Okay.
Can I just ask a question? Is David and Dov not the same?
No. David's my uncle and Dov is my father.
I always thought that Dov was a derivative of David.
Dov Bernard, usually. Dov Bernard.
Dov Bernard will come to that in a second. Okay. Okay, so now, we talked now about the census. Did you... okay, that's the next one. Okay. I'm talking now about sources and resources. Remember, we were talking about, first of all, documents, family photos, and heirlooms as well. Now, one of the interesting heirlooms, and really it's a fascinating heirloom that contains an actual inscription by the great-grandfather of mine who owned it. There's a family heirloom, a Hebrew prayer book, a Siddur. It's called Seder HaTfilah in Derech Chaim. It was printed in Vienna in 1859. I inherited this from my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. Now, how do I know that my great-grandfather had that? Because my grandfather, Israel, okay, he wrote an inscription, I'll show you that in a second, in the first page of the book, or the cover, the inside page, and he said in that inscription, he said, I have taken this book from the collection of my father, which is my great-grandfather, Shmuel. And then the inscription is very, very sort of faded. It's so difficult to read. And I asked somebody who was able to, decipher what exactly is written there. You can read it, but it's not all that clear. And I think, the answer that came was that this great-grandfather Shmuel is supposed to be, according to what is written there, either the son of Yaakov, but that doesn't, add up, because later on in the research I find that Shmuel is not the son of Yaakov, he's the son of somebody else. So who is this Yaakov? Anyway, there was some kind of link here between my great-grandfather, who acquired the Siddur, remember, 1859, and he wrote that he got it from Yaakov. I think that word son should be in brackets with a question mark, because the deciphering was a little bit difficult. and passed it down to my grandfather, and then to my father, and I got it today. So heirlooms are very important because look, this is evidence who the grandfather was, who the great-grandfather was, and possibly what the name of the great-grandfather was. Can you go a bit further? Here we are. This is the say that this family Sidur, the front pages. Okay, so you can see that it's a Sidur if you read Hebrew, Sidur Tfilah, called Derech Hayim, and you can see that it's in Vienna, 1859. Okay? But now, if you want to decipher what's written here, it becomes very, very difficult because it's so faded.
Is that written in Yiddish?
It's not in Yiddish, it's in Hebrew, and in good Hebrew. And here is Israel. You can identify Israel. It's my grandfather, okay? Asidur Azeh, Lakapti Misifrei, and he goes on to say, Sifrei who? And he says it here, Shmuel. Look, we have a problem with the deciphering here, so I don't want to, be inaccurate here. But he was saying here that this Sidur came from a certain Yaakov. And he was Yaakov, Hadar, Vazagar, Hadash. Many ways of interpreting this. You must remember that Zagar is the name of the town, but Zagar is a watch. So, was this Yaakov a watchmaker as well? Or was there something else to this inscription? No easy matter to decipher a inscription of this kind and to do it with reasonable accuracy and make, some kind of case for this being evidence. But the moment you see the names there, then the names are evidence. Because if you've got Israel Levitas here, and you've got Shmuel, then you know that that belongs to the family, and it came down to us. Okay, so let's go a bit further. Here. Those are the dates and the stuff. Alright, we talk now about sources and resources, apart from which there are inquiries. I'm sort of giving an overview of all the methods that you might use and that I use in order to collect the information. You begin collecting information and you want to get on the phone. And you want to get on the phone, okay, you're getting information from the burial society. You're not phoning deceased persons, I didn't say that, but you're phoning the burial societies, and you are getting information about burial dates, grave sites, locations, and tombstone inscriptions. Very important, because those inscriptions are to, let's say, like, they are very, very carefully written as a rule. It's rare, I think, I don't know, someone might correct me, but as far as I know, it's rare to find an inscription on a gravestone that is inaccurate, because there's the Chevra Kadisha, and it's a religious duty to make sure that you're giving honor to the deceased person, and so at least you write his name properly. And if you've got information about it, there's a birth and so on, where you can put it accurately on the gravestone inscription. Let's go on a bit. Then I'll tell you a bit more about that a bit later. We're talking about information that comes from interviewing relatives. Okay. Now, interviewing. Interviewing means talking to people. Okay? Unless you're coming to a person and saying, look, it's a formal interview. What's a formal interview? When someone comes to interview you with a scheduled questionnaire and represents an organization. One of these interviews means that you're talking to people over a cup of coffee, and they're reminiscing, and they're telling you this, and they're telling you that, and you're writing down sometimes, and sometimes you're storing what is said, in your mind, and writing it up later. A lot of information, for instance, that I have in and the family comes from descendants of a cousin, a first cousin of my father, okay, and the descendants of my second cousin. They live in a kibbutz. First of all, one of them lives in a kibbutz called, not kibbutz Tzvi, it should be Kirat Tzvi, mistake there. And another lady lives in Ramat Golan, in a moshav. They have a memorial brochure of their late mother, my father's first cousin, in which she recollects how she grew up in the town of Kulshan, in Kulshan. And the photo of the grave site of her grandfather, my great-grandfather, Israel in the Mount Olivet Cemetery. So when I say interviewing, when you're interviewing, you're speaking to relatives, and someone comes up and says, you know, apart from what we're talking about, we've got a brochure. And then you've got a large amount of information that is invaluable. Because if someone actually wrote recollections, and later on, after they pass on, the descendants collected as a memorial brochure, you've got very, very interesting genealogical material and information there as well. Okay, but naturally we're talking about interviewing people who are there to be interviewed. Now, the gravestone inscriptions, I must show you this. We're talking about, in the previous slide I showed you that you got information from the memorial brochure in which this first cousin of my father, Malka Yorav from the kibbutz, okay, is shown in a photo. Beside, standing next to the gravestone of her grandfather, our great-grandfather, on the Mount of Olives. And the story is very touching. She was really very ill towards the end of her life, and she made it a kind of a family, a sacred mission, really. And she got her children together. She said, we know that he is buried on the Mount of Olives, and up to 1967 you couldn't go to the Mount of Olives. It was in Jordanian territory. But after the Six-Day War, it took a long time, but eventually they managed, towards the end of her life really, to manage to arrange a visit to the gravesite, and she has a photo there. And she discovered the gravesite there with the inscription on the tombstone. And the inscription says, here lies the most distinguished Rabbi Israel Yonah, son of Shmuel Moshe of Korshan, who died in August 1907. It's written, the Tariq, the date is in Hebrew, Elul, Tav Resh Samach Vav, which is 1907. Now, Israel Yonah, okay? Bar Shmuel, the son of Shmuel. So now we've got a little bit more information that my great-grandfather, okay, Israel Yonah's father's name, so it was already my great-great-grandfather, was Shmuel Moshe. That is evidence, and that gives us a little bit more information about the generation preceding Israel Yonah, who died in 1907. To locate the grave, we had to find the correct the place, the location of the grave, and the records today in the Febra Kadisha are available. In other words, you can go and get the information, but to actually go up to the Mount of Olives, which we did in last year, 2007, to mark 100 years.
Wasn't it vandalized under Jordanians? Wasn't it vandalized?
Some of the graves there were vandalized, and there's been a restoration project as well. But this grave wasn't vandalized. But it was, you had to clean it and so on, to reveal the inscription. And it's very difficult to find it there because you have to, if you've been up to the Mount of Olives Cemetery, you have to climb up between all kinds of very, very difficult high steps and between narrow pathways of graves. But at any rate, this evidence is very, I would say, helpful and quite powerful. In other words, you are locating here information that gives you another link in the family ancestry, in the family chain. Okay, go. Then we also located the gravestone of my grandfather, Israel, and remember that Israel Yonah, who we saw before, is the father-in-law. So the father-in-law of my grandfather Israel. So his father's name is Shmuel Yitzchak, one generation back removed. Not Shmuel Moshe, which is the great-grandfather's own father, from Toba's side, his wife's side, but grandfather Israel Levitas is the son of Shmuel Yitzchak, And remember, I showed you that inscription in the Siddur. It's in Shmuel. And he is buried in Nachlat Yitzchak, which is the cemetery just between Givatayim and Tel Aviv. And one can visit the grave. Go on a bit. And our grandmother, Yona Toiva, is buried about 2 rows away from him. Okay, she died 3 years before him, by the way. Wrong with the date here. It should be 1933. Okay, for some reason the date is inverted. She died in 1933. He died in 1937. And I'm credit my wife for sitting here for helping find this particular gravestone of my grandmother, because she was phoning the people at the Fibra Kadisha and we have to find this place because it couldn't be that he was buried there, she wasn't buried there, and eventually they turned up and found him. Okay, right. So again, inscriptions here are very important on gravestones. Let's go further. All right, another source, archive searches. If you want to visit archives, then you visit archives. And archives you can spend many, many weeks, months, years if you like. But today you can save time because many of the archives have got their holdings online, they've got databases. And you can go into some of the archives and request particular information to search. But you can also, if you want to see original documents, you actually make a visit. And you correspond sometimes with them. I'm not going to give you the details here, but I'm just mentioning this as a source of information, a resource, if you like. Let's go ahead. So what do you find if you go into archives? One of the resources, of course, is this website called Jewish Gen. Jewish Gen is Jewish Genealogy, and I think everyone here has heard of Jewish Gen. Maybe you haven't gone into it that much, but some of you have. And if you go into Jewish Gen, you can find a treasure trove of information through all sorts of records, including tax records. Now, what are these tax records? Here is a shagam called Malka. Now remember, we had a Malka shagam, who was my father's first cousin, who came to Palestine and was married in Kibbutz Tirat Tzvi. But she was named after someone. Who was she named after? Partly, this was her grandmother, because the tradition is that you name, in many cases, after grandparents, and so now you've got this Malka Shagam, okay, who's called a praise woman. And what do we know about her? She was born in 1841. Well, who is she? Our surmise is that her father, apparently Marcus, she, we think, I think, was the wife of this Israel Yonah, who came in 1900 as a widower to Eretz Israel. She apparently passed away before he came because he was a widower. He lost her. She came, as it were, to Korsharai. We don't know exactly where she came from. We've got something that's a bit ambiguous here, whether she had postal savings bank records. We didn't quite understand that. But here we've got at least the fact that she paid some tax of 2 rubles at the time, whatever it was worth then, I don't know. And there she is. Okay? And it's in these what are called revision lists, these tax lists that appear today on the internet, that you can get them through searching the internet. Let's go a bit further. Now, while we're looking at lists or resources, there's one additional piece of evidence, if you can find it. Applications for passports tell you the name of the person who applied. Apparently, this I think is my father, but we've got a problem. First of all, his name wasn't Boris, his name was Dov. He was actually named Beryl. So, was Boris Beryl or wasn't he? But there he is. And he was single at the time that he left for Palestine in 1922, which you remember the census showed in 1922. But what has happened here, they gave him a date of birth at the 12th of March 1891. Now that was wrong. So, but you know, sometimes you say, well look, someone maybe made a mistaken entry. I don't know, maybe the person who entered this information into the passport application, or for any reason that we don't know, he may have listed himself as being a bit older than he was at the time. I don't know. If it's him, it's an internal passport application for an immigrant to Palestine in 1922. And you find it on the internet. Again, information of this kind, as I said before, can be a bit iffy because not every single piece of information fits. But it's close enough to say, okay, nearly certain that this is a passport application that he may have given. Let's go further. Here, there's a site called the South African Jewish Roots Bank. The South African Jewish Database, the Center for Jewish Migration and Genealogy Studies, and that is at the Kaplan Institute in Cape Town. The data is available if anyone wants to go into this on the web. And here, I was looking at what are called shipping lists, passengers on ships who came to South Africa at a particular time, because I know that my father came to South Africa in 1928. And I sort of browsing and looking. All of a sudden I see a certain name here which is difficult to enhance it a bit. But here is Levitas Boris. Remember, he was called Boris Dog. And here he was on the ship called the Randfontein, arriving in Cape Town in 29th of October 1928. Now, where's the supporting evidence? What does it say about him? It said that his former surname, okay, his mother's name was Shagan. There we are. We've got sort of supporting evidence here. How old was he when he came? He was actually 31. He was born in 1897. What does it say here? His age, I'm afraid I can't see clearly enough here. It says 31, age. So we've got supporting evidence that this could have been him. Let's go further. All right. There is a site in Jewish Gen called Family Finder. You can submit a family name, and you can ask for a search for family names. We won't go into it right now, but I'll come back to that in a second, okay? Family Finder will find you just not only your particular family name, but similar names. You could call them equivalents or names that sound the same, maybe, but are spelled a little bit differently. But you can focus on the family names and see how many you can come up with, and then see if you can identify who you think belongs to your family, part of your family or not. Okay, that's another source from the web. Now, we were talking about going to archives. Here we've got something that only could be found in an archive. My wife and I were in Cape Town in 2002. And we went to visit the State Archives in Rowland Street. Rowland Street, that is an Afrikaner name. At 72 Rowland Street, there are State Archives, and we began looking for documents. What kind of documents? It was interesting because I know my father was a builder, and he, while he was in South Africa, in Cape Town, he came as almost a penniless immigrant. But he began working, and he made a living, and then began developing a business as a builder, and a person who would also help other people acquire homes through obtaining mortgages. But he had submitted plans and applications for building permits to the engineering department of the Cape Town municipality. So we went into that. They've got files. All of a sudden I see, here's this application from my father asking permit to build houses here, houses there. What's going on? I said, you know, there's a young archive worker there, you know, a young Afrikaner man there. I came over to him and I said, you know, my father was one of the builders of Cape Town. He said, yes, he says, we know. Oh, he wanted to sort of make sure that, my satisfaction in finding this evidence that the family had settled down in Cape Town. But here, we were looking at the marriage registers and we found that my father actually was married in 1933. My parents were married in 1933. And this is a civil marriage certificate, not a certificate that you got from the Knesset. I don't know if there was a Knesset. This is a civil marriage, and they were married in April 1933. Okay, go for that. Now, here's the one document that I'm always so happy to show people. Because this document, an application for a birth certificate, shows that I was born. There you are. Can't deny it. And the document was actually submitted by my father in Plumstead. That's a neighborhood, a suburb in Cape Town, in 1936 when I was born. And I don't know how this duplicate got into the family kind of records and albums, but at any rate, I've got this document to this day. And so there we are, a document that is actually very valuable for some future genealogist in the family who want to know a bit about me. Okay, so have a look and see.